Hello, I'm Councillor Bill Kingan. In this video on the Three Waters reform, we will look at the government proposal on what the new water entities will look like and how they would operate. If the reforms go ahead, from July 2024 the country will be divided into four blocks called A, B, C and D. Waitaki will fall within entity D. That would see our water services being managed by an entity that covers most of the South Island, with the boundary corresponding with that of Ngāi Tahu's tribal boundary or Takawai. Waitaki will be one of 20 territorial authorities in the entity, and one of the questions that councillors will have to consider when it comes time for us to make a decision about our participation in these reforms is exactly how that will work for our district. To answer these questions, I'll discuss the governance structure that is proposed for the four entities that will potentially control the country's three waters. This is quite complicated, as this diagram illustrates. Essentially, the important bit is the green part, showing who's directly responsible for running the entity, the board of directors and the entity management. The board will be made up of professional directors with specialist knowledge and skills. However, though it is often said that mayors and councillors have a better understanding of the wants and the needs of the communities they represent, they will not be in the proposed model. It is proposed that councils will still own the assets. The ownership does not go to the government, to the entity or to Maori. However, the control will not sit with councils. They will work together to choose half of the 10 or 12 members of the regional representation group. The other half will be chosen by mana whenua, which in our case is Ngāi Tahu. That regional representation group will be responsible for ensuring that the entity is carrying out its obligations on behalf of all of the councils and the communities involved. One of their important roles is to appoint the independent selection panel, and that selection panel will appoint the board directors. The reason for such a complicated structure is to provide sufficient separation between the operation of the entity and the councils, as that achieves one of the goals for the reform, which is to get any water assets debts away from councils. That is needed for most councils, but for Waitaki that is less necessary, as our water asset debt is reasonably low. Another important role of the regional representation group will be to set the goals of the board, its key performance indicators if you like. You keeping up so far? Our council has had a number of workshops, and to help us understand this and other aspects of the reforms, as it is rather complex. We will put this information on our website so you can take your time over it. Just how our local concerns and wishes will be heard within this model isn't clear right now, and this is one of the things that we will want to know more about before we make any decision. We know there will be an economic regulator to help ensure the board makes good financial decisions, and there will probably be a consumer group to help ensure that the entity works for its communities. But the model is still being fine-tuned to ensure that each district can get the services it needs both now and into the future. With entity D defined by the Ngāi Tahu Takawai boundary, what role does the iwi play in these reforms, or if these reforms go ahead? Some people are worried because they have heard that iwi will be given 50% ownership of the assets or half the control of them under the new proposals. This is incorrect. Iwi will not own the water or the assets. Also, iwi will not have any veto rights. There is one decision though which requires 75% of the whole regional representation group to vote for it to happen, and that is a decision to sell the entity. Even if that threshold is reached, the decision then has to go to the public and requires a referendum to reach a 75% vote in favour for the sale to happen. Because a government cannot bind a future government, requiring a 75% vote in favour of any decision to sell means that it will be more difficult to privatise in the future. In the next video, we'll look at what happens next and your part in giving us feedback on this.